listening to Podium Podcast with Simon Hartley and Tom May. This is the show that invites the world's top athletes to discuss life in and after professional sport. Podium Podcast is brought to you by True Potential Wealth Management. To find out more, visit domorewithyourmoney.co.uk.
Hello, mate.
Hello. How you doing?
I'm all right, you?
Very good. I'm pretty sure that next time we chat, you'll be a married man.
I know. Will I be greyer?
I doubt
I might be
it.
greyer.
I don't think that's even possible, is it?
Everyone says that. You can piss off a lot of you. I'm looking forward to this afternoon's or today's podcast. Anyway, I've always wanted to talk to a rower because I think they're absolute lunatics. I don't understand. I can't get my head around it.
Well, I think you're right. I think they are probably absolute lunatics. I've come across quite a few, and I don't think there are any exceptions to that rule. But I'm also really, really curious to find out how somebody who was at the top of their game as a rower takes that mindset into a vastly different world, like being a diplomat and being a leadership and management development consultant. I mean, that is a big shift.
Listen, she might have got a silver medal at the Olympics and a world championship gold, but I reckon she's probably the only sports person in history that's become a diplomat. I'm going to say it. I don't know whether that's true, but I can't imagine there's many others. It's that's probably a real anomaly, isn't it?
Yeah, and she's a PhD. I mean, that's not bad either, is it?
Yeah. Well, there's probably a few less of them as well.
Absolutely.
Generally across sport. But let's get into it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us, Cath. It's a real pleasure to chat to you. Now, you were in the Olympic programmes before Team GB became a real force. I mean, recently they've been highly funded, but I'm guessing when you were an Olympian, there wasn't the amount of funding behind the Olympic programmes there is today.
Thanks, Simon. So I saw the transition from the old world into the new world. So it was 97 that the lottery funding came in. And so I did the Atlanta Olympics before that, but then the next two were kind of in this transition period as things were shifting. So I really saw kind of the emphasis on women's sport that was massive because the lottery funding, you could no longer favour your men's programmes. That had been the case in lots of Olympic programmes. So it opened up a lot of opportunity. It also switched some of the sort of thinking and attitudes and approaches to Olympic and Paralympic sports, some of which now, when we look on 20 years later, have worked brilliantly, some of which we may look back on and think might not have worked quite as well.
Absolutely.
I can't believe with some of the Olympic sports how lacking in funding they are, really, Cath. For me, Olympians are the most professional sports people on the planet. And I'm probably making a massive sweeping generalisation of footballers, but if you look how much they are paid in comparison to Olympians, it blows my mind. And I know, for example, those that are on a gold medal pathway have that top level of funding, but even that is mind-blowingly little in comparison. How do we get around to changing it? Because it has to be changed in some way, hasn't it?
That's a really interesting question. I wouldn't even compare an Olympian to footballer because that world is so very different. And I compare it in a way to what came before, which was where you had to work at the same time. And, it was really difficult to survive at all, to do more than one Olympics, etc. So the lottery funding has changed things that it enables athletes to be full-time athletes. They generally, particularly if you're in that kind of top level of funding, you can live without getting into debt. Your costs are paid for, your training camps are paid for, your competitions are paid for, and you have enough to get by. You don't have enough to, buy villas and gamble and all those things, but I don't think you become an Olympian in order to live in a villa or in order to gamble or sort of some of the other things that come with that. So I suppose yes, I do think that sports people could and should be rewarded better, but actually would I wish on them the world of footballers? Not necessarily. I think there's probably somewhere in between.
Do you think that actually...
Simon,
go on.
Do you think that this is why we see Team GB being so successful at games? Because of the driven nature. You take money aside, because you can, I think, tarnish some sports by so much money being involved. You take money aside, you suddenly got the raw ingredients of, do you want this? How much do you want this? And then it comes down to the individuals themselves, clearly, which we've got loads of brilliant athletes.
Certainly, I mean, the Olympians I've come across, they're not in it for the money, because quite honestly, there isn't that much of it. Like you say, I mean, even on high-level podium funding, you're not going to earn a fortune, and the sponsorship that comes with it doesn't usually, it might buy you a couple of nice things, but it's not going to be enough to retire on usually, very rarely. So yeah, they're not in it for the money, and I do think that gives you quite a sort of almost pure motivation for what you're doing. The other thing I was going to ask Cath, actually, because these programs aren't particularly well funded, and like you say, you were involved right at the sort of transitional stage and even before funding, do you think it makes you more sort of self-reliant, more resourceful?
So I think that motivation point is really key. You are doing it because of an intrinsic motivation, an internal motivation, not extrinsic, not funding, not rewards, not bonuses. And so, it's a different motivation system that actually goes far deeper and helps you to be more resilient. We know that if you focus on that sort of sense of purpose, of mastery, these sort of intrinsic motivators, and you are in charge of it, autonomy, that self-reliance you talk about, then actually you can often delve into deeper reserves of creativity, resilience, connecting with others, because this has a meaning that goes beyond just a pay packet. This is, you're an Olympian for life. And that's what you walk away with at the end of it. So you focus on the quality of what you're doing. You're in it to see if you can push the barriers of your sport forward. You want to explore your own human, physical and mental capabilities, and maybe be part of exploring what your sport, what's been done before. You can't put a price on that. And that is just such a kind of incredible thing to be part of. I think it gives you skills that enable you to succeed in life afterwards. You are inherently somebody who is motivated. Often just being an Olympian is something that people are interested in. So you have, some kind of currency, if you like, coming out of it that isn't financial, but is something that's useful in other ways. You might want to stay in the sports world, and of course you'd have great experience to share, or you may want to take that into another field. So I don't think it's that you come out, you don't come out as a rich person. You just don't come out with a rich bank account.
One thing I've got to ask, and I have to ask it now, with regards to rowing, and I'm talking from experience here, being the most diabolical rower on the planet, you guys are just crazy, because you're sat there on a rower, and I do not know about the places that you can take yourself to, and then just go, get up, go again, get up, go again. And you just talked about pushing boundaries of your sport. Well, that means you're basically taking yourself to a very, very dark place every time you sit on that rower. I sometimes ask myself this about prop forwards, why they play the game, because I don't understand how that can be fun, like pushing against another big hairy front rower. But where does that element of fun come from rowing? Because every time I sat on it, I just got the shivers.
So you need to sit in a boat, because that's where the sport comes alive. I agree. I've had some dark times on that rowing machine. The rowing machine is a means to an end. It's part of training. I don't think you'll find many rowers who really love that. But what we do love is being in a boat. The feeling of moving a boat over water, part of a crew, is something that I fell in love with. I actually didn't sort of intend to take it up, and I took it up relatively late at university. I took it up with no aspirations to be an Olympian, and I purely fell in love with what was a really different team sport than I'd experienced anywhere else. I loved being on the water, so every day it's a little bit different. You see the seasons, you see that kind of natural world around you, and on days where we were doing 24-kilometre outings, absolutely exhausted, it's maybe not going well, I would still think this is a beautiful place to be. And I might think, do you know what, I'm giving up tomorrow, I'm retiring, I can't do this anymore. But I fundamentally love being here in this boat with these incredible people around me. And I found the team experience of rowing particularly compelling. So when I'd done sort of sports at school, hockey, sort of netball, classic kind of things that girls did back in the day, those sorts of team sports, things you might do on a pitch with a ball, I'd not been very confident. I wasn't a very fast runner, and I kind of was told I wasn't very sporty, and I would opt out. I didn't really know how to get involved. I didn't really know how to become part of it. I wanted to, but I couldn't really access it. And often the ball would come to me and I'd fluff it up, whether it was hockey or football or whatever. And then I'd sort of find myself avoiding it. I'd kind of, almost, I'd opt out. I'd step aside, if you like. When you get in a rowing boat, you can't opt out anymore. It's really cold in the river. It's actually quite difficult to get out across the oars. So you've no longer got an opt-out. And it means you get in a rowing boat and you opt in to being part of something. You might take a duff stroke. Well, you've just got to get on and take the next one and try and make it a better stroke. And I found that permission to be part of something that I've just got to get on with. I've just got to opt in and do my best. Brilliant. And you kind of work at 3 levels all the time in the rowing boat, which I also really loved. It's not just about how hard you go, because that's no good if it's not in time with others. So you've got to get your own effort up, but you've got to do it in a way that links in with people around you who you're close to, but you're not physically connected. Your seats move separately, your oars move separately. So you've got to sense what else is happening around you. And then you've got to sense that environment you're in, the weather, the water running underneath the boat. So you're always operating on those 3 levels. It's almost like trying to run a 3-legged race or something without ties around your legs. You've got to be that in sync with other people, and you're doing it not on, and you're running on water. You're running on an unstable surface, if you like, that's unpredictable. And so all of that brings what you're doing alive, and you never take a perfect stroke. So every stroke you take, and you take thousands and thousands and thousands, and enough to kind of have gone around the circumference of the earth several times, but you're always looking to get the next stroke better than the one before.
We hope you don't mind us interrupting this episode with a very brief shout out to our partners at the Podium Podcast, True Potential Wealth Management. At True Potential Wealth Management, their mission is to help you do more with your money. Expert financial advice, innovative investments, and leading technology are all designed to put you in control and help you achieve your financial goals. To find out more about their specialist advice, investment opportunities, and pension services, visit domorewithyourmoney.co.uk. That's domorewithyourmoney.co.uk. With investing, your capital is at risk. True Potential Wealth Management LLP is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Thanks for listening. Now, let's get you back to this week's show.
So I've definitely gone wrong by getting on an indoor rower.
Yes,
but that
quite
said,
possibly.
I do know you've got one tucked away down there, so it can't be that bad.
It's a means to an end. It's a means to an end.
So from that perspective, are you operating at 100% all the time? Are you operating at sort of an 85, 90% so that you can stay in time with the team that you're rowing with?
You've got to train all of those levels. So we would have, one of the things that means we kind of have such a heavy schedule is we have to train kind of endurance, do lots of long sessions that are slightly less intense, but we also need raw sprint and power ability. So we have to do this kind of shorter fartlek sessions or the kind of high intensity sessions. So we tend to hit everything within our training. And again, weights, we want the kind of pure strength built up, but we also want the kind of real speed strength as well. So that's why our training load is huge, and we train sort of generally 3 times a day. In a race, ultimately, everything's got to be maxed up. So you are at a kind of maximum output that's synced and in perfect time with everyone around you, and alert to the environment and adjusting as you may need to the conditions. So you're pushing how much you can get to kind of 100% across all 3 levels.
Simon, is there any other sport whereby you're operating at that level of exhaustion, is probably the best word that I can think of, combined with having to think of all the different elements of the skill to make sure that boat keeps going faster? Is there another sport that you can think of where it's like that?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few where you would have to really push yourself physically for a longer period of time. But actually, you're right, introducing the skill element to it as well. it adds a new dimension completely. Because if you think middle distance running and things like that, you'd have to push yourself really quite hard for a period of time, probably about the same periods of time, maybe depending on the distance. But the skill element added in creates a real new dynamic in it. It's a very, very unique sport in many, many ways.
We hear so many coaches, don't you think, talking about thinking clearly under pressure. That is one of those scenarios where, and I've heard of some of the stuff going on in this pre-season, in the build-up within the football season and the rugby season, testing players, pushing them to their limits, as Cath talked about there, and then asking them questions. And they've got to get those questions right. They've actually got to think, even when you're just trying to get enough air in to stay on your 2 feet. That's a really big element of sport at the top end that you must have come across a fair bit with your role, Simon.
Absolutely. And I think, it's when we were talking about those things that people take out from their sports into other areas of life, the ability to take yourself into discomfort and make decisions and execute when you're there, to really take yourself to the limits. I don't think many people know where their limits are, honestly. I mean, for years and years and years, I had no idea where my limits are. I hadn't been anywhere close to them. But this is where athletes do kind of push themselves and get towards. And I think it does help you get into your discomfort zone. One of my real curiosities, question for Cath, is you stepped out of rowing into a very, very different area of life. Diplomacy and rowing, I imagine, are very, very different on lots of levels. That must have been a step into your discomfort zone, I imagine.
So they are really different, and yet I kind of discovered that there were some similarities as well. I mean, essentially, becoming a diplomat was the career I'd always intended and always wanted to do, and it's what I had kind of studied, languages and international politics. So it was another passion. And then along the way, I hit rowing, and that became a passion, and I kind of had to explore where that might take me. But the thing that in a way links to the work I do now, which is around leadership development, culture change, working with teams, is that in the diplomatic world, I was often working in situations of really high pressure, where there was a lot of unpredictability, where you're on a long journey. There's the outcome is sort of in the future. And you have to work together. You need each other in order to, get through the negotiation, in order to connect with, within your own team, but then working obviously with the countries or the representatives you're negotiating with. And I found myself in another world of high pressure teams where actually a lot of the same things applied. It felt kind of high stakes, and actually the stakes were even higher this time because they were real life kind of high stakes. And I just found, in both worlds, the sports world and the diplomacy world, and, most of our lives, we work in teams. And we don't always spend a lot of time learning how to work well in teams. We have to prove ourselves on an individual basis most of the time through education, through lots of the sort of testing and recruitment. But when we get into a job, we have to then work in a team. And that's the thing that fascinated me from kind of both of those roles, and that links into sort of what I do now, really, is that the people you think this is going to be a good team because it's got really intelligent people, or this has got the best rowers in this crew. And then you kind of go and do your stuff and you go, it's not working and something isn't clicking. And over here, this team's got huge momentum. And that's the thing that really fascinated me actually out of both careers, was this need to, understand and work at a different level, connect with other people in order to work out how you're going to come together to kind of play to your strengths, to, achieve something that hasn't been done before. And that's critical in both of those worlds. In diplomacy, you're trying to create a path that hasn't been done before. Whether it's, in peace terms, we're trying to kind of collaborate with countries to construct new trading agreements, or in conflict situations, trying to kind of co-create a peaceful way forward. So you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before, that's difficult, that has got lots of reasons why you shouldn't do it or can't do it, or it hasn't worked in the past. And your job is to keep learning, to keep believing that slowly you might move forward. And that kind of mindset that you have as an athlete, where, it's not, you don't just go faster every day. You're learning, you have setbacks, you have different levels at which you realise, what you're capable of and what people around you are capable of. And that sort of mental side, applied very similarly to this world of negotiating, of trying to kind of pull together people to do something that hadn't been done before.
Did that become, or did it seem harder because it wasn't, with all due respect to you having decided you wanted to do that as a career? Was it because it was something you didn't know as well as rowing a boat? Or so did that create its own pressure? Because I know when I came out of rugby, I felt completely out of my comfort zone, to Simon's point, because people at times were talking a different language, or they were putting pressure on me, whether indirectly or directly, to get something done that I hadn't managed to do before. I didn't know what I was doing. And that comes from being in a completely different environment. Was it that, or did you find more pressure getting to the end of your physical capabilities?
No, the pressure in the diplomatic world was that this stuff mattered, and what we agreed would affect people's lives. And I looked back on what felt like Earth, sort of direly critical, standing on Olympic start line. Oh my God, the world is shaken by this tomorrow. And realising actually that was a real privilege, and the world didn't kind of stop spinning whether I lost or won a race or how fast my boat went backwards. And almost gave me that perspective, if you like, on sport that I think sometimes we lose, that actually is helpful to, from a performance mindset, not to think that, the world depends on winning the league or whatever it might be, to bring a little perspective into it. And actually the pressure in diplomacy came, this is like, there are lives and, lives at stake in what we're doing. And that felt really different. And that's, was a whole kind of different level of responsibility, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Simon, do you think sports people? I understand exactly what Kath's saying there. I would sometimes, when we were going through bad patches at Newcastle, I would sit there, I'd be crying at times. Like when you actually sit back and I look at it now, and I'm like, oh my, really? Was I doing that? Because actually, does it really matter? You lost a game at the weekend. Does that desperation to win within sport actually, we know that we're told as players to that's learn from learn from the mistakes you made, get better. That actually puts us as sports people in a pretty strong position, I think, when you leave sport and you move into something else, because actually the dark times that you thought were pretty dark, they don't really mean anything, really, when it comes down to it, and you compare it to what Kath's been talking about.
Absolutely, and I think Kath and I share a lot of we have a lot of shared territory in terms of our philosophy on this. I mean, I've had many conversations with athletes over the years, and I've said, so why do you do what you do, and why is winning important? Because that standard phrase, winning is everything. Okay, why? So you're going to swim quicker than somebody today. Big deal. Neither of you are going to drown. So what if you finish first and they finish second? What's it all about, really? And almost like, I think there's a benefit in showing how absurd sport is sometimes. Okay, guys, we're going to work really hard to put a bag of air over a white line. So what? Guys, we're going to work really, really hard to hit a little white ball around a field. So what? What's this about, really? Why does it matter whether we win, lose or draw? What's the point here? And that's something that I think, Kath's also explored in some detail. What are your thoughts around this, and where's it taken you?
Yeah, I think the longer, and as this conversation shows, the longer you're in sport, the more you start to kind of question what's its purpose, what's it really about, what brings the lasting value. And this sort of immediacy that I've got to win, is often quite shallow, quite temporary. When you do win, then what? Okay, it's great, but actually, why did that matter? And what am I left with that has a lasting value? And so sometimes I think we over egg the sort of the ranking bit, the medal bit, the trophy bit, which is that extrinsic piece, if you like. That it's nice, you stand on a podium for a couple of minutes, that's lovely. It feels good if you're number one, but you sort of step off the podium and go, well now what does that mean? What am I left with? What am I left with 10 years later? What are the things I took from that? And that for me is the stuff that has real value to kind of why we do sport. It's that stuff we learn about ourselves. It's often the relationships that we've had with people along the way that are the things that last far longer. When you get back together, Tom, with your kind of mates, you don't sort of go, oh, wasn't it great that we won that event? And didn't we do well to come top of this league? You go, oh God, wasn't that moment here, that kind of story? Or, do you remember when we were laughing about this? Or do you remember this, how we got ourselves through it? And, those are the things that you hold on to, that kind of story, the human development piece. And that's what sport is about. It's about a vehicle for exploring what we're capable of together. And so, really, this sort of winning can distract us from thinking about that, what I think it shows, which is, exploring possibilities, learning about how we can come together and do things that hadn't been done before. And that's the kind of bigger piece, the lasting value. And, I really found this sort of sometimes this kind of macho focus on, if you lose, it's terrible. You must mourn, you must grieve, you must beat yourself up. You are worthless. This stuff that kind of, sits in the Rocky films, but frankly also sits on the touchline and, sits in too many sporting environments, elite and grassroots. It really distracts us from this bigger piece that sport is a vehicle for, exploring who we are as people, for how we work together, for how we might do things differently, for how we can innovate, for how we can try different things. It then becomes a useful vehicle to reflect on how we might do that in other parts of society, how we can live kind of healthier lives, collaborative lives, how we might explore doing things in ways that haven't been done before. And so, freeing ourselves up to kind of redefine what success in sport is about is for me, a really kind of exciting way to rethink sport.
It's quite interesting when you look at that. If you think back to Leicester City winning the Premier League a few years ago, they no way had anywhere near the best players. But you can imagine, and Simon, you may well have met or listened to Claudio Ranieri, but you can imagine him working with those players to make them better people. Whereas if you looked around the Premier League at the time, there was probably several other managers that would do exactly what Cath just talked about. You've got to win at all costs, and everything goes out the window. And actually, it puts the fear of God into a load of players that they might not get picked the next week, or they're making too many mistakes. They start looking inwardly as opposed to how I can develop myself outwardly to keep performing.
Yeah. And you really mentioned an important factor there in terms of fear. It creates a fear-based environment. We can do a lot based on fear, but ultimately it's limiting. And it also uses a kind of motivation system that, it doesn't create a positive experience. We don't want that replicated in schools, in organisations. It has its limits. It often leads to much more of a kind of burnout experience from that, what's the point of that? So, the fear factor, I think, is a huge thing that, this fear of failure that comes with that sort of macho, you're only as good as your result, and all of that, where your identity is wrapped up in it, your self-worth is wrapped up in, knocking this white ball around. That is a mistake, I think, and a misreading, and ultimately limits performance and well-being.
I had some coaches that probably overplayed that fear. So it's all right getting bollocked every now and again, but if you're getting it every week, by the end of the month, you're a bit like, I've heard this all before. It doesn't really make a difference. Well, it's going to happen next week anyway.
Yeah, and actually, if you think about it, that winning in its own right doesn't. The motivation from it also doesn't last that long either. I've had some bizarre conversations with athletes where one of them, we were talking about what do you want to achieve, and they said, the gold medal. I said, okay, what does that mean? Why the gold medal? Why is it important? He said, because it means I'm the best or whatever. And then something clicked, and he said, do you know what? The medal is just a metal disc on a ribbon. I said, yeah, that's exactly what it is. I said, I could nip down to the trophy shop and buy you one. There you are. There's your medal. What's this all about, really? And then he started to really think, this is about achieving my potential, pushing myself, being able to. And if it wasn't physical, it would be in another realm. I want to find out how good I can be. That's really what it's all about. Excellent. Now we're starting to, uncover the reason why you're doing it. But if you take this into a business context, we need to hit the target. Great. Okay, why? So somebody came up with a random number, usually ends in a zero. This year we're going to hit £10 million profit or whatever. Well, why? What's this going to do for us? What's it going to do for the world? And if we don't know, it's just target after target after target, and it does become an empty kind of existence. We lose our connection with this thing. It's just a number. I find often the toughest time for Olympians, and love to get Kath's thoughts on this one, is immediately after the games, especially if you've won. Motivationally, that's often a really tough time. Well, you got the medal, now what? And if it was just about the medal, it's fragile. Actually, it's quite vulnerable as a motivator.
Yeah, I think we create that sort of the Olympic blues that we now almost see as a given. Or it's proven that that's what happens after you win, rather than going, hang on a minute, how about we try and create a different path whereby you don't feel flat and depressed after you've won? Because haven't we got something wrong if that's the case? And I mean, I sort of started off thinking about all this, researching about this, writing about this, partly because I won a silver medal at the Olympics, and I sort of, thought under the kind of initial thinking, well, I'm the first loser, so I basically failed. And, I'm interested to sort of think about how people manage coming second. It's, it's something in life. We're often runner-up if we're going for a job interview, or at school we don't quite make the head boy or girl or whatever it is. It's an experience in life, and I wanted to sort of research a bit more about that. And I was sort of thinking, how do I make sense of my rowing career? Did I fall at that last hurdle? How do I sort of walk away and go, this is what it means. This is how good or bad it was. But I found that when I talked to lots of gold medalists, who have, they're that one brilliant step ahead. Everything is great. They've achieved everlasting happiness, haven't they? I found so many stories where they were saying, actually, I feel really empty. I'm full of regrets about, I didn't enjoy it along the way. I feel a bit depressed. I feel quite disconnected. And I thought, oh, hang on a minute. I can't write about the silver medalists being one step off everlasting happiness if the ones on the top step haven't got everlasting happiness. And of course they haven't. It's what the medal represents. And if we don't know what it represents, which is all of those questions that you're asking there, Simon, what are the things that last when you step off the podium 5 years later? What are you left with then? That's the stuff that matters. And so often this pursuit of the medal has become disconnected from values, from people, from communities. Who are you part of? Who are you going to enjoy this with? And that's where we need to kind of now have if you like, a broader definition of what success means. And I want it to be something that lasts beyond a round disc on a ribbon that, you put in a drawer and over time tarnishes. It's so important that we kind of shift this. Otherwise, we are basically kind of limiting what sport can do for individuals, but also the bigger picture of what sport can do. And yet the trouble is, we so often, all the newspapers are focused on that kind of outcome piece all the time, the narrow piece, the results. Okay, right, next week's results. And we've sort of got into this trap where, we lose some of the stories. And, in actual fact, there is a hunger for stories. There is a hunger for, podcasts and people finding out what happens behind, because, of course, that's the real life bit. I was really struck recently when Emma Raducanu sort of came into a press conference, and they were sort of saying to her, are you feeling pressure, about the US Open and the outcome? She's like, the only time I feel pressure and think about outcomes is when I come into a press conference because you ask me about it. The rest of the time, I'm out there learning, playing tennis, trying to do my best, and every time I'm learning stuff for the next time, and I'm on this journey. And I thought, my goodness, she talks so much sense, and what a shame that kind of world of journalists is trying to sort of almost diminish what sport can be.
I'm interested to pick your both of your brains, because I think I'm not quite sure how you'll answer, but I know, Simon, I think you and I have spoken about this before. When it comes to junior sport, let's take it right the way back. If you think about what we're doing at top end of sport and what you've just talked about there, does winning matter then when you're a young lad or a young girl playing sport?
So I love the fact that in Norway they have a real emphasis on community sport, on everyone involved in sport, and nothing competitive up to the age of 13. And yet they managed to produce, they're top of the winter sports Olympics medal table, and have incredible athletes like, who we saw sort of last week at the Europeans, Karsten Warholm and Ingebrigtsen, and for a country of that's very small.
Yeah.
So clearly, being the best under 11s isn't necessarily linked to kind of Olympic success 10 years later. I feel sort of quite passionately that we have got this wrong, and we have a huge dropout in sport, particularly with girls. And the research that is done around why do children enjoy doing sport, it is because it's fun, because you're with your friends, because you're learning, because you're being part of a team, because you're sort of supporting and challenging each other, and winning comes way down. And so it's, often adults who are sort of, sort of putting on this extra interpretation that it's got to be about winning the league. When actually, surely, the bigger prize for us as a nation is having youngsters that stay involved in sport for the whole of their life. A very tiny percentage will be elite anyway. So why are we gearing everything around the 1% that will be elite? We want people involved in sport. We want to have healthy lives. We want people to become volunteers and coaches and to enjoy, and fans, so that sport's for everyone. So why don't we start off with that approach? I think talent spotting is crazy and is often proven to be wrong because people develop at different times. So we actually exclude talent when we're trying to identify talent. The way we exclude people is often terrible, chucking them out of academies, destroying their lives at that point, or just excluding people. I mean, I even see this with my son, who's kind of 11 and very into cricket, but this sort of performance thing is coming in now, and it's almost, where's the space for you? He loves cricket, but if he doesn't make this sort of certain cut, then where's the space for him? And I think, how mad. He loves cricket. Why would you, running cricket, not want my son involved in some way? So, absolutely. Needs rethinking.
So, Simon, I'm not. I'm probably going to say this in the worst way possible. So I'm going to try.
Knowing you probably will.
Out
Yeah.
the hole already. Yeah. Exactly.
Go for it.
So my son's 13 and has been playing rugby in various different sports. My daughter's 5, and I don't buy into this. Oh, there's no score at the end. I can't get my head around it. I totally agree with you. There should be no pressure towards winning a league or anything like that. That's so long term over a sort of longer period of time. But I do think learning the highs and lows and how to deal with those highs and lows certainly put me in a better position as I grew up. That doesn't mean I was any better at losing, by the way. I was still pretty upset. But I think deep down it helped my levels of willingness to get back up or to try again. Whereas I sometimes look at my kids, and I have to be careful because the door's open, but I sometimes think it's too easy for them to give up right now. It's too easy. I'm not winning, or and turn their back on it.
So for me, it's all about the meaning that we place on winning, and the sort of, some people put kind of winning up on the pedestal. Winning's great, losing's not. Well, actually, in life, losing can be pretty valuable, as you say, as an experience. Sometimes we gain far more from losing than we did from winning. And over the long term, today's win might not be our long-term win. So, I think we just need to take a far more sort of global and longer-term perspective on it. I mean, if we won today, but it cost us something massive, if we won today and we compromised some real values in the process, we cheated, we lied, whatever, have we really won? What have we won? Years and years ago, I started a really stupid physical challenge. I wrote a little book about it called Could I Do That? And it was all about how you take on the stupid challenges. And on one level, I failed at the challenge because I gave up on it. But I did so because, quite honestly, my wife needed me to look after her. She was ill at the time. And I got to that point of saying, so what if I complete the challenge and I look back? What have I actually won? I might have completed the challenge and people will say, great, well done, you completed your challenge. But what's it cost me? And I think people lose the real meaning and the real value of winning. They forget what it actually means to them. And so, we get to that. Go on.
No, sorry, I thought you were pausing there. So I think you can have goals and a focus to what you're doing. So I don't think you should be aimless in youth sport, and don't need to be. But it's actually about setting broader success criteria. So maybe you're scoring different things than purely goals, for example, which of course are arbitrary and dependent on lots of kind of variables. You might be scoring around, actually, how well did we uphold our values today? Or, how well have we really pushed ourselves mentally to kind of keep going when we were tired? How much have we really trusted in each other? I think you can still have a focus, so you are learning. It's really important. There is that. I think it's actually important you have more of a learning focus. And sometimes focusing on the score means you just go for the sort of short-term bit. That means, okay, we get over the line first. But actually, we didn't sort of take a risk. We didn't learn anything new. We didn't try something, because that might have meant we'd made a mistake and wouldn't win today. But ultimately, if we didn't try stuff, then we put a ceiling on how we can improve. And that I found very early on in my career, that because there was this sense that you had to win every training session, I could never make the technical changes that would help me to go faster in 3 or 6 months' time, because I'd go slower next week consistently, and then I'd be bottom of the rankings and probably get chucked out, or certainly my life would be hell. And so, I think the key is to make sure that we keep learning, because that's actually what's going to produce better performances. It's very motivating as well to be learning, on sort of different elements, if you like, that are more within your control than whether you win a game or not often, because balls hit crossbars, referees can make bad decisions, the team might be stacked against you. So actually thinking about meaningful success criteria, I think, is the gap between sort of where you are, Tom, and that your fears about having this sort of, hang on, it's going to lose momentum, or people won't improve, people won't get a sense of doing something worthwhile. I actually think you can get a sense of doing something even more worthwhile than simply scoring it in such a narrow way.
Kath, normally towards the end of this podcast, we asked 4 ridiculous questions, which has been landed on my plate. I don't know why Simon's made me ask the ridiculous questions.
No, it's Justin.
So, but normally, yeah, blame it on Justin, because he can't even come in and
that's right.
It's all Justin's fault. But I'd like to just a couple of things that you. What are the techniques or traits that you've taken from sport into your sort of new roles?
So I think during, I was a rower for 10 years, went to 3 Olympic Games, and I went on a massive journey from this initial obsession with winning, it defines who you are, you've got to be the best kind of mindset, to realising that not only did that sort of make for not a very fun experience, it actually also limited my performance. I wasn't exploring my capabilities. So the journey by that kind of 3rd Olympiad to think differently, to broaden those success criteria, to focus on learning, improving. The athlete that improves the most is the one that over time optimizes the results that they're capable of as well. So to shift that into, what am I improving every day? What am I learning every day? That's something that has always kind of stood me in great stead. And on the days when you don't get the results, you keep moving forward. It's that resilient thinking, if you like. So that is certainly something that, when those times when stuff doesn't go well, you go, do you know what? I know some stuff that's useful for me next time I'm doing this, or it's something else that I'm going to do. And I think the other thing is the focus on relationships, on people, on playing to your strengths, on kind of, working as a team, on realizing you can't do anything on your own. You shouldn't try and do things on your own. And to really kind of invest in who you've got around you. Those are probably the things that, I kind of sometimes learnt the hard way in sport, but I really realised are most valuable and have always been valuable in other contexts since.
I think there are a couple of really good traits that perhaps haven't been mentioned as much. Resilience has, but that element of relationship, not directly, specifically. Right, here they come. Whether it be Justin's fault or Simon's fault, it's me that has to read it out. I think I know the answer to the first one. If you hadn't been a professional athlete, what would you have been? And is there another vocation that took your interest?
So, well, I did have the great luck of being a diplomat, which was something I really wanted to do. You know, beyond that, my other two kind of loves, which actually link to those, are music and politics. So the politics bit links to diplomacy, actually also links to sport in terms of wanting to make, you know, life more, you know, better for people, building communities, building kind of a better world to live in, if you like, on this kind of super big scale. And music to me is something that I love. I grew up actually kind of more with music than with sport, but I think they're very similar. I think they kind of instinctively move you. There's something you can have whether you're rich or poor. It's something you'll have for the rest of your life. It leads to a healthy life. You know, and again, often those are the things in a day that give you that kind of just a moment of joy, you know, music or sport. So, you know, I'd love to have some kind of, life in music in some way.
An opera singing Prime Minister.
Wow, yeah, that's probably pushing it.
Who is the person you admire most in sports and in business?
Yeah, that's quite hard. I tend to have sort of mixtures of people that I like a bit of this of them, a bit of that of them. But somebody I really admire who's actually kind of made that transition from sport into kind of business, but also thinking, that thought leadership piece, is Matthew Syed. And, you know, again, he's almost moved through thinking about sports culture now into more of a political world. And so, you know, I had the opportunity to kind of overlap with him in one Olympic team and to kind of have spoken to him when I was writing my book. And so I really admire his thinking. He really pushes the boundaries and he connects a lot of different worlds across, you know, what happened in a sports game with sort of some philosophy, with what's happening in politics at the moment. And I think that's really healthy. We often end up over specialising. And I am always curious in lots of different areas and making connections across things. And so, yeah, he's somebody I really admire.
Like that. We've got one person for two answers. I like it. That's being efficient, that, Kath. That would make the boat go faster. If you had some funds to invest, what would you invest it in?
Yeah, that's tricky. I guess, you know, actually going to go back to almost that sort of music and sport thing. I don't think we do enough to give people that you know, opportunity to live healthy, joyous lives, which would actually be the best way to reduce the sort of NHS budget. And so, you know, we treat everything sort of retrospectively when you get sick, but I don't think we do enough to create healthy lives. So, you know, I'd definitely be sort of investing, you know, in state education. We've dropped out a lot of, again, music and sport, which to me are the most valuable things over a lifetime. So, you know, those are elements of society that I think we have underappreciated, underinvested in. So I would, you know, definitely be investing in more kind of grassroots sports opportunities. I know we do a lot, but this whole legacy from these big events we have not delivered on. And although there are a ton of great foundations out there, the gap is still enormous. But I think if we really wanted to, if we understood the real value, then we could really make a difference. So yeah, those would be the areas I'd be exploring. How can we really shift the dial to change the quality of life using music and sport?
And the last one, no doubt the toughest one as well. You can only watch one film for the rest of your life. What would it be?
It is quite tough. I'm not somebody who actually watches masses of films. I like a Bond. I like a Bond film, but I don't think I could watch one over and over again. Although I quite like watching the old ones. I like a musical, you know, that musical bit. So I sort of, you know, could I go with Singing in the Rain or Greatest Showman or something like that? But do you know what? I'm going to come back to a bit of an old favourite that really is often kind of popular that I like, which is Shawshank Redemption, because it goes back to some of the fundamentals of what life is about.
It's a great film, and also you probably only watch it twice for the rest of your life. It's that long.
It's just it is about life, isn't it? So you could always watch it and find something different. It does go on a long time, but it is about. I'm slightly fascinated by how if you're in prison or if you're in a different environment, you suddenly would get a different perspective on things. So I always find that quite fascinating anyway. What if you kind of ended up in that position? How would you view things? How would your whole kind of value system change? And so it tracks life. So I think it's relevant whether you're young, whether you're old. So I think it would always feel relevant. So that's what I'm going with.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Kath, I've learned loads. I've definitely learned loads. I learned loads more listening to you than I have from Simon in years.
Of course. And I suspect you listen to me about as much as my wife and kids do. Next to none. My youngest daughter would absolutely love your answer about sport and music. She's into dance and cheerleading, and for her, the coincidence between sport and music, that collision, is joy for her. Brilliant. Tom, thank you very much. Kath, thank you even more. And thank you guys for listening. Please do join us again on another episode of the Podium Podcast. Take care.
You're listening to Podium Podcast with Simon Hartley and Tom May. This is the show that invites the world's top athletes to discuss life in and after professional sport. Podium Podcast is brought to you by True Potential Wealth Management. To find out more, visit domorewithyourmoney.co.uk.